Close your eyes for a moment and forget the city you know. No traffic, no bridges, no towers of glass and steel, no clock counting the hours. Where London stands today, there was once only water, mud, trees, and silence. Before London had a name, before it was a capital, before it was even a city, this land was something very different. And yet, everything that London would one day become began right here. Thousands of years ago, beside a slow, powerful river. This is the story of London before London existed. Long before written history, long before kings and empires, human life had already found its way to this place. Archaeological evidence shows that people lived along the River Thames as early as 400,000 years ago. These were not city builders. They were hunter-gatherers, moving with the seasons, following animals, fishing the river, and surviving in a harsh, prehistoric world. The Thames was not just water, it was life. It provided fish, fresh water, transport, and protection. The land around it was rich with forests full of deer, wild cattle, and birds. The river acted like a natural highway, allowing people to move, trade, and connect long before roads existed. Even in prehistory, this place mattered. Over time, small settlements appeared along the riverbanks. Simple shelters made of wood and animal skins. Fires burning at night, families gathering, telling stories, surviving together. They did not know it, but they were laying the earliest foundations of one of the greatest cities in human history. As centuries passed, Britain entered the Bronze Age and then the Iron Age. New tools, new weapons, new ideas arrived. Tribes formed. Power shifted. Among these tribes were the Celts, skilled metalworkers, and fierce warriors. They controlled large parts of Britain and understood the strategic value of rivers like the Thames. The Thames was wide but shallow in places, making it one of the few points where people could cross safely. This crossing point was crucial. Anyone who controlled it could control trade, movement, and power. This made the area around modern London extremely valuable. By the 1st century BCE, Britain was no longer isolated. Across the sea, a powerful empire was watching. The Romans had already conquered much of Europe. Their legions were disciplined, organized, and unstoppable. They built roads, cities, and forts wherever they went. Britain was rich in resources, and Rome wanted it. In the year 43 CE, the Roman invasion of Britain began under Emperor Claudius. Tens of thousands of soldiers landed on the southern coast and marched inland. Celtic tribes resisted, but Roman military power was overwhelming. As the Romans pushed forward, they reached the River Thames. This was not just another river. It was wide, tidal, and difficult to cross, but the Romans understood its importance immediately. They needed a base, a trading center, a bridgehead, and so, around the year 47 CE, the Romans founded a settlement. They called it Londinium. Londinium was not chosen by accident. It was built at the lowest point where the Thames could be easily bridged. From here, ships could travel upriver and out to sea. Goods could move in every direction. Soldiers could control the region. This was the birth of London. At first, Londinium was small. A wooden bridge crossed the river. Simple buildings lined muddy streets. But the Romans were builders, and growth came fast. Traders arrived from across the empire. Soldiers protected the settlement. Markets formed. Roads spread out like veins, connecting Londinium to the rest of Roman Britain. Within a few decades, Londinium became one of the most important cities in the province, but its rise was not peaceful. In the year 60 CE, a powerful uprising shook Roman Britain. Led by Queen Boudica of the Iceni tribe, Celtic warriors revolted against Roman rule. They burned cities to the ground. Londinium was one of them. The Romans abandoned the city, leaving it defenseless. Boudica's forces destroyed Londinium completely. Thousands were killed. Ash covered the streets. For a moment, it seemed like London's story had ended before it truly began. But Rome returned. The city was rebuilt, stronger than before. Stone replaced wood. Walls were constructed. A forum, basilica, bathhouses, and amphitheater rose from the ruins. Londinium became a symbol of Roman power and order. By the 2nd century, it was a thriving city of over 60,000 people, one of the largest cities north of the Alps. The Thames remained its heart. Ships from across the empire brought wine from Gaul, olive oil from Spain, spices from the east. In return, Britain exported wool, metals, and grain. Londinium was no longer a frontier town. It was a global city of the ancient world. But nothing lasts forever. By the early 5th century, the Roman Empire was weakening. Pressure from invasions, economic collapse, and internal conflict forced Rome to withdraw its legions from Britain. Around 410 CE, Roman rule ended. Londinium was left behind. Without Roman protection and administration, The city declined rapidly. Trade collapsed. Buildings fell into ruin. People left. For decades, the once great city stood mostly abandoned, its stone walls slowly crumbling. Yet even in decline, the location remained powerful. The river was still there. The crossing still mattered. And history was not finished with this place. What began as a prehistoric riverside camp had survived invasion, destruction, and rebirth. It had already shown a pattern that would define London forever. Fall, rise, rebuild. In the chapters ahead, this pattern will repeat again and again. Saxons, Vikings, Normans, fires, plagues, wars, and revolutions will reshape the city. But every version of London will trace its roots back to this moment. Back to the river, back to the crossing, back to Londinium. This is where London's story truly begins. When the Romans returned to Londinium after the fires of rebellion, they did not come back with hesitation. They came back with certainty. This time, they were not building a temporary settlement or a fragile trading post. They were building a city meant to last. A city that would stand as Rome's statement of power at the edge of the known world. Londinium would no longer be an experiment. It would be Romans. The Romans understood something deeply important about cities. A city was not just buildings. It was order. It was control. It was identity. And so, after crushing the rebellion, led by Boudica, Rome reshaped Londinium from the ground up. Straight lines replaced chaos. Stone replaced wood. Law replaced fear. The Romans began with roads. Roman roads were not casual paths. They were engineered with precision, built to move armies, traders, and messages quickly across vast distances. From Londinium, roads stretched out in every direction like spokes from a wheel. One road ran north toward what would become Lincoln and York. Another moved west toward Bath and Wales. Others connected Londinium to ports, forts, and towns across Roman Britain. These roads turned Londinium into a hub. Goods flowed in and out constantly. Soldiers marched through its gates. Messengers carried orders from governors and emperors. Londinium became the beating heart of Roman Britain, not because of size alone, but because of connection. At the center of the city stood the Forum. This was the soul of Roman urban life. The Forum was where politics, commerce, and social life collided. Merchants sold goods under covered walkways. Officials announced laws and judgments. Citizens gathered to talk, argue, and watch the city move around them. Beside the Forum stood the Basilica, one of the largest north of the Alps. It was a place of administration and justice, where Roman law ruled every aspect of life. Rome brought rules to Londinium, written laws, taxes, census records, property rights, contracts. The chaos of tribal life was replaced with bureaucracy, structure, and hierarchy. Above all of this rose the Roman walls. By the late 2nd century, Londinium was surrounded by massive stone walls, nearly 6 kilometers long. Towers rose at intervals. Gates controlled entry and exit. These walls were not just for defense, they were symbols. Inside the walls was civilization. Outside was the unknown. Within these walls lived a population that may have reached 60,000 people. Romans, Britons, Gauls, Greeks, Africans, Syrians. Londinium was one of the most diverse cities in the Roman Empire. It was a place where languages mixed, cultures blended, and identities overlapped. Walk through the streets of Roman Londinium, and you would hear Latin spoken alongside Celtic tongues. You would smell bread baking, meat roasting, and incense burning. You would see merchants weighing goods, children playing, soldiers drilling, and slaves carrying water. Daily life in Londinium was busy, loud, and alive. Homes varied depending on status. Wealthy citizens lived in townhouses with mosaic floors, painted walls, and private courtyards. These homes often had underfloor heating systems known as hypocausts, a remarkable Roman innovation. Poorer residents lived in cramped wooden apartments, often above shops. Fires were common. Disease spread easily. Life expectancy was short, especially for the poor. But Roman Londinium still offered opportunity. Trade was the city's lifeblood. The River Thames was crowded with ships. Cargo arrived from across the empire. Wine from Gaul, olive oil from Spain, pottery from Italy, spices from the east. Glassware, jewelry, coins, and luxury goods filled the markets. In return, Britain exported wool, grain, leather, tin, and other raw materials. Money flowed through Londinium. Roman coins passed from hand to hand. Banking, credit, and contracts allowed commerce to grow at a scale never seen before in Britain. The city also had places of leisure. Public bathhouses were central to Roman life. These were not just places to wash. They were social centers where people met, talked business, relaxed, and shared news. Men and women visited at different times, moving through warm rooms, hot rooms, and cold pools. There was also entertainment. An amphitheater stood near the heart of Londinium. Here, crowds gathered to watch gladiatorial contests, animal hunts, and public spectacles. These events were violent, dramatic, and popular. They reinforced Roman values of strength, dominance, and order. Religion played a powerful role as well. Romans worshipped many gods. Temples in Londinium honored Jupiter, Mars, Minerva, and other deities. At the same time, local British gods were often absorbed into Roman belief systems. This blending made Roman rule more acceptable to the local population. Later, new religions arrived. Among them was Christianity. At first, Christians were a small and often persecuted group. But by the 4th century, Christianity began to spread more openly through the city. Londinium reflected the wider changes happening across the Roman world. Yet life in Roman Londinium was not peaceful for everyone. Slavery was common. Enslaved people worked in homes, workshops, construction, and administration. Some earned freedom. Many did not. Inequality was built into the system. Disease was constant. Plagues could sweep through the city. Sanitation existed, but it was limited. Life was fragile. Still, Londinium endured. For nearly 4 centuries, Roman rules shaped the city's foundations. The grid layout, the roads, the river trade, the walls, the idea of London as a center of power and commerce. All of it came from this period. Even when Rome began to weaken, Londinium remained important. But nothing in history stands forever. By the early 5th century, Rome was under attack from all sides. The empire was overstretched, resources were limited. Legions were recalled to defend the heart of Rome itself. Britain was abandoned. Roman officials left. Soldiers marched away. Administration collapsed. Londinium, once protected by imperial power, stood alone. Trade slowed. Coins disappeared. Buildings fell into disrepair. The population declined. Without Rome, the city struggled to survive. By the mid-5th century, Roman Londinium was largely empty. Streets that once echoed with footsteps became silent. Bathhouses closed. Markets faded. Nature began to reclaim stone and wood. But the foundations remained. The roads did not vanish. The walls still stood. The river still flowed. Rome had planted something here that could not be erased. Even in abandonment, Londinium shaped what would come next. The Saxons, the Vikings, the Normans, and every generation after would build on Roman ground. They would reuse Roman stones, follow Roman roads, and settle within Roman walls. London would change names, rulers, languages, and faiths. But its bones were Roman. This chapter of London's story is not just about conquest, it is about transformation. About how an empire took a riverside settlement and turned it into a city that could survive centuries of collapse and rebirth. Roman Londinium did not just exist in history, it became history's foundation. And as we move forward, we will see how the city fell into darkness, only to rise again in new and unexpected ways. The Romans are gone, but London remains. To understand Roman Londinium, you must understand power. Not the loud power of armies marching through streets, but the quieter power of administration. Paperwork, law, taxation, authority written in ink and stone. Londinium was not officially the capital of Roman Britain at first. That role belonged to Anglo-Londinium, modern Colchester, but over time, Londinium became something far more important. It became the engine. From here, Roman governors managed trade, justice, and military logistics. Orders moved faster. Money flowed more freely. Information arrived sooner. Londinium worked better than any other city in the province, and Rome always favored what worked. The governor's palace stood close to the river, overlooking the Thames. From this vantage point, Rome watched everything that entered and left the city. Ships, taxes, grain, soldiers. Londinium was monitored, measured, and controlled. This control shaped daily life. Every citizen, free or enslaved, existed within Rome's system. Census records counted people and property. Taxes were collected regularly. Failure to pay could mean punishment, confiscation, or worse. But in return, Rome offered something powerful: stability. For many people living in Roman Britain, Londinium represented opportunity, a place where a craftsman could open a workshop, where a trader could grow wealthy, where a former soldier could retire and live under the protection of Roman law. Roman citizenship mattered. It brought legal rights, protection, and status. Over time, more local Britons gained citizenship, slowly blending into Roman identity. Londinium became less foreign and more familiar. But beneath the surface, tension never fully disappeared. The memory of conquest remained. Tribal identities did not vanish overnight. Some Britons adapted. Others resisted quietly. Roman rule was accepted, but not always loved. This tension could be felt in religion. While Roman gods were worshipped openly, older Celtic beliefs survived in private. Sacred sites outside the city walls continued to be used. Offerings were made to river spirits, forest gods, and ancestral powers. The Thames itself was sacred to many. People threw coins, weapons, and valuables into the river. Believing it connected the human world to the divine. Even Rome could not fully control belief. As the city expanded, Londinium began to change physically. New neighborhoods formed outside the walls. Workshops, cemeteries, and markets spread outward. The population grew. So did inequality. Wealthy elites lived comfortably, surrounded by servants and luxury. The poor lived crowded together, vulnerable to fire, disease, and hunger. A single bad harvest could push families into desperation. Plague was always a threat. Roman cities were cleaner than earlier settlements, but they were still dangerous places. Waste systems were limited. Clean water was not guaranteed for everyone. Epidemics could spread quickly. And when crisis came, it came hard. In the late 2nd century, the Roman Empire entered a period of instability. Plagues swept across Europe. Military pressure increased along distant borders. Political turmoil weakened central authority. Londinium felt the impact. Trade slowed. Coinage became less reliable. Repairs to buildings and roads were delayed. The city remained important, but cracks were forming. By the 3rd century, Roman Britain faced repeated threats. Rebellions, pirate raids along the coast. Power struggles between rival emperors. Londinium was no longer just a city of trade. It became a defensive stronghold. The city walls were strengthened. Fortifications were improved. Soldiers were stationed permanently. Watchtowers guarded the river. For the first time, fear returned to the city. Yet, Londinium survived. Even as Rome struggled, the city adapted. Local leaders took on more responsibility. Trade networks shifted. Life continued, slower but steady. Then came change of a different kind: Christianity. By the 4th century, Christianity had moved from persecution to acceptance within the Roman Empire. Churches began to appear. Christian communities grew quietly, then openly. This new faith challenged old traditions. It spoke of equality before God, of moral law beyond imperial command. It did not replace Roman order overnight, but it changed how people saw authority, life, and death. Londinium reflected this transition. Pagan temples still stood, but new ideas were spreading through homes, markets, and gathering places. The city was evolving again. Then, Rome withdrew. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but steadily. Soldiers were recalled. Funding declined. Governors departed. By the early 5th century, Roman Britain was on its own. Londinium, once the jewel of the province, lost its purpose. Without imperial support, trade collapsed. Coin use disappeared. Coin use disappeared. Skilled labor left. The population shrank rapidly. By around 450 CE, Roman Londinium was nearly empty. A city built by empire had outlived its empire. Stone walls stood silent. Roads led nowhere. The Thames still flowed, but the docks were quiet. Yet, even in abandonment, Roman Londinium did not die. Its influence remained embedded in the land. Future settlers would return to these ruins. They would reuse Roman stone, follow Roman roads, build within Roman walls. They would inherit a city already shaped by centuries of planning, power, and survival. Rome did not just build Londinium. Rome taught this place how to be a city. And that lesson would echo through every chapter of London's future. When the Romans left Britain, they did not close the door behind them. They simply walked away. No ceremony, no final declaration, no promise to return. One by one, Roman officials departed. Soldiers marched south and never came back. Coins stopped arriving. Orders stopped coming. And Londinium, once the proud heart of Roman Britain, was left to face the future alone. At first, nothing dramatic happened. The stone walls still stood. The roads still led outward. The Thames still flowed, as it always had. But the system that kept the city alive was gone. Without Rome, Londinium had no reason to exist. Trade collapsed almost overnight. The markets fell silent. Warehouses emptied. Skilled craftsmen left in search of food and safety. Buildings fell into disrepair. Roofs collapsed. Streets filled with weeds. By the middle of the 5th century, Roman Londinium was a ghost city. Its population had shrunk to a fraction of what it once was. Large areas inside the walls were abandoned completely. Nature crept back in, slowly reclaiming stone and brick. To later generations, these ruins must have felt haunted. Broken columns, empty bathhouses, crumbling forums. massive walls built by a vanished power. It was a reminder of a world that had collapsed. And yet, London's story did not end in silence. It changed direction. As Roman authority faded, new groups began arriving in Britain. They came from across the North Sea: Angles, Saxons, Jutes, Germanic tribes, seeking land, power, and opportunity. At first they came as raiders and mercenaries. Later, they came as settlers. The Anglo-Saxons did not immediately move into the ruins of Roman Londinium. To them, the old city may have seemed cursed or impracticable. Instead, they built new settlements nearby, using timber and thatch rather than stone. One of these settlements grew just west of the abandoned Roman city. They called it London. Londonwick was very different from Roman Londinium. It was not planned, it was not walled. It grew organically along the riverbank. Wooden houses clustered around markets and docks. Fishing boats lined the Thames. Trade slowly returned. This was a trading town, not an imperial capital. And yet, it worked. By the 7th century, Londonwick had become one of the most important ports in Anglo-Saxon England. Merchants arrived from across Europe. Goods flowed in and out. Wool, slaves, furs, and metalwork were traded for wine, glass, and luxury items. London was alive again. But power in Anglo-Saxon England was fragmented. Kings ruled small kingdoms. Alliances shifted constantly. Warfare was common. Stability was fragile. Still, London mattered. Its location made it valuable to whoever controlled it. The Thames remained the key. Whoever held London controlled trade, movement, and wealth. By the 8th century, London was under the influence of the Kingdom of Mercia, one of the strongest Anglo-Saxon powers. Later, control shifted to Wessex. Each ruler understood the same truth. London was too important to ignore. Then came a new threat from the sea: the Vikings. At first, Viking raids were sudden and terrifying. Longships appeared without warning. Warriors stormed coastal towns and river settlements. They looted, burned, and vanished just as quickly. Monasteries were easy targets. Trading towns like London were rich prizes. The Vikings quickly realized what the Thames offered them: a direct route into the heart of England. In the late 8th and early 9th centuries, Viking attacks on London increased. Londonwick, open and unwalled, was vulnerable. Raids became more frequent and more destructive. By the early 9th century, the situation had become critical. Then came the Great Heathen Army. In 865, a massive Viking force landed in England, not to raid, but to conquer. Kingdom after kingdom fell. Cities were captured. Kings were killed or forced into submission. London stood in their path. In AD 71, Vikings captured London and used it as a base. The city's wealth was stripped. Its people suffered. England stood on the edge of collapse. Only one kingdom remained strong: Wessex, and one king would change London's fate forever: Alfred the Great. Alfred understood that London could not survive as an open town. It needed defenses. It needed walls. It needed planning. In 886, Alfred retook London from the Vikings. But instead of rebuilding Londonwick, he made a bold decision. He moved the population back inside the old Roman walls. The ruins of Roman Londinium were reoccupied. Streets were cleared. Walls were repaired. Gates were restored. London became a fortified city once again. This new city was called Londonburg. The old Roman skeleton gave London something priceless: protection. Alfred reorganized the city carefully. Streets were laid out. Markets were regulated. Defenses were strengthened. London became part of a network of fortified towns designed to resist Viking attacks. For the first time since Rome, London was once again a planned city. Trade returned, stronger than before. The city's position on the Thames allowed it to thrive even during war. Merchants felt safer inside the walls. Craftsmen returned. Life stabilized. But the Vikings did not disappear. Instead, they became part of the story. Large areas of England fell under Viking control, known as the Danelo-Scandinavian settlers lived alongside Anglo-Saxons. Cultures blended. Languages mixed. Laws merged. London stood at the edge of this divided world. It became a meeting point between Saxon and Viking England. This blending reshaped the city. Place names, words, customs, and trade practices reflected both cultures. Viking traders brought new networks, new ideas, new connections across the North Sea. London was no longer isolated. It was international again. By the 10th century, England slowly reunited under strong kings. London grew in importance with each generation. It became a royal city, a center of trade, law, and religion. Churches were built, markets expanded, coinage returned. London began to resemble a true capital once more, but peace never lasted long. In the early 11th century, Viking attacks returned with force. Danish kings sought control of England itself. London became a battleground again. Time after time, London resisted siege. The city's walls held, its people fought, its position made it difficult to conquer. London earned a reputation for strength and defiance. Even powerful kings struggled to break it. Eventually, England fell under Danish rule. King Canute became ruler of England in 1016. Unlike earlier raiders, Canute ruled as a king, not a destroyer. Under his reign, London prospered. Trade flourished. Law was enforced. Stability returned. London benefited from being the center of a North Sea empire stretching from England to Scandinavia. Once again, London adapted. It always did. By the mid-11th century, London was the largest city in England. Its population was growing. Its wealth was unmatched. Its influence was undeniable. Then came 1066, the year that changed everything. After the death of King Edward the Confessor, England fell into crisis. Rival claimants fought for the throne. One of them was William, Duke of Normandy. The Battle of Hastings ended Anglo-Saxon rule. William marched toward London, but London resisted. The city did not surrender easily. Its walls, its people, its legacy of survival gave it confidence. Only after negotiation did London finally submit. William was crowned king, and London became the capital of Norman England. Once again, the city had survived the fall of an era. Romans, Saxons, Vikings, each had shaped London, each had tried to control it. None had erased it. London endured because it adapted. From Roman ruins to Saxon markets, from Viking sieges to fortified revival, from collapse to growth. This chapter of London's story is about resilience, about how a city can fall apart and still rise again, about how geography, trade, and human determination can outlast empires. London was no longer just surviving history, it was beginning to lead it. And in the next chapter, we will see how the Normans transformed London into a medieval powerhouse, leaving a mark that still defines the city today. By the time London entered the 10th century, survival had become a skill. The city had learned how to bend without breaking. Every invasion, every collapse, every new ruler had taught London the same lesson. Adapt or disappear. Inside the old Roman walls, life had settled into a new rhythm. This was no longer a Roman city pretending to be alive. It was something new. Anglo-Saxon in language, Scandinavian in influence, Roman in bones. Walk through London at this time and you would not see marble statues or grand forums. You would see timber houses, narrow streets, open markets, and smoke rising from hearth fires. Life was practical, hard, busy. The city was divided into neighborhoods based on craft and trade. Blacksmiths worked iron near the river. Potters shaped clay. Weavers produced cloth that would be traded across England and beyond. Markets were loud, crowded, and full of bargaining voices. The Thames remained the city's greatest asset. Ships arrived daily. Not massive Roman cargo vessels, but smaller trading ships from across the North Sea. Merchants from Scandinavia, the Low Countries, and Northern Europe brought goods and news. London was plugged into a wider world once again. Trade meant power. Kings understood this, and so did nobles and church leaders. Whoever controlled London controlled wealth, and whoever controlled wealth could raise armies, build churches, and secure loyalty. This made London politically dangerous. Anglo-Saxon kings did not rule through absolute power. They relied on alliances, oaths, and support from powerful cities. London was the most important of them all. Royal assemblies were held here. Laws were announced. Coins were minted. London became a symbol of legitimate rule. But authority was never unchallenged. Viking influence did not fade after Alfred's victories. Scandinavian settlers lived throughout eastern England. Many had settled peacefully, married locally, and adopted Christianity. Others remained tied to Viking leaders across the sea. London sat at the crossroads of this tension. At times, it was a shield against invasion. At other times, it was a prize to be taken. The city's defenses were constantly tested. Viking fleets sailed up the Thames again and again. Sieges became part of London's memory. Though people learned how to endure shortages, fear, and uncertainty, they repaired walls, guarded gates, organized watchers. London did not rely on one ruler to save it. It relied on itself. Religion also played a growing role in shaping the city. Christianity, once fragile, had become central to London's identity. Churches multiplied. Monasteries gained land and influence. Bishops became powerful figures, both spiritual and political. St. Paul's Cathedral, or earlier versions of it, stood as a symbol of continuity. Even as kings changed, the church remained. It preserved learning, law, and memory. Education, limited as it was, survived through religious institutions. Writing returned. Records were kept. London's story was no longer lost to silence. By the late 10th century, London was not just surviving, it was leading. It had become England's largest city, its richest market, and its strongest stronghold. Its population grew, its influence expanded, its confidence increased. Then came another storm. In the early 11th century, Viking attacks returned with new intensity. Danish kings did not want tribute or raids. They wanted England itself. London became the center of resistance. Again and again, Viking armies attacked the city. They tried to force entry by land and by river. They failed. London's walls held. Its people fought. Its resolve strengthened. The city gained a reputation across Europe. London was hard to break. Eventually, even resistance was not enough. In 1016, Denmark's King Canute became King of England. But unlike earlier conquerors, Canute ruled with intelligence. He respected English law. He used London as a royal center. He protected trade. Under Canute, London flourished. The city benefited from being part of a vast North Sea empire. Trade routes expanded. Wealth increased. Stability returned. Once more, London adapted. It accepted a new ruler, not because it was weak, but because it understood survival required flexibility. After Canute's death, instability returned. Rival claims. Political chaos. Weak kings. London stood firm, but the country fractured around it. Then came the final turning point. In 1066, England faced invasion from Normandy. William's victory at Hastings ended centuries of Anglo-Saxon rule. The old order collapsed. Nobles were replaced. Land was seized. London prepared to resist. The city had done it before. It had survived. Romans, Saxons, Vikings, but this time was different. William did not rush the city. He surrounded it. He cut off support. He showed force without wasting men. London's leaders negotiated. The city surrendered. William was crowned king in London. With that moment, the Anglo-Saxon and Viking age came to an end. But London did not fall. It transitioned. The Normans would build castles, stone keeps, and new systems of control. They would reshape the city again. Yet everything they built stood on what came before. On Roman walls. On Saxon markets. On Viking trade routes. This chapter of London's story is about endurance. Not glory. Not conquest. Endurance. London survived the collapse of Rome. It survived centuries of invasion. It survived cultural conflict and political chaos. By the time the Normans arrived, London was no longer a fragile town. It was a hardened city, a city that knew how to survive history. And in the next chapter, we will see how the Normans transformed this survivor into the beating heart of medieval England. When William of Normandy entered London in the winter of 1066, he did not walk into a broken city. He walked into a city that understood power. London had survived Romans, Saxons, and Vikings. It had been burned, abandoned, rebuilt, attacked, and defended. Its people were cautious, experienced, and proud. They did not surrender easily, and they did not forget quickly. William knew this. That is why he did not trust London. And that is why he built the tower. After his victory at the Battle of Hastings, William faced a dangerous reality. He had won the crown, but he had not yet won England. Rebellions flared across the country. Anglo-Saxon nobles resisted. Cities hesitated. London was the greatest prize of all. It was wealthy, it controlled trade, it held symbolic power. Whoever controlled London ruled England in truth, not just in name. William was crowned king on Christmas Day, 1066. In Westminster Abbey, the ceremony was meant to show unity. Instead, confusion and fear broke out. Shouts from inside the church were mistaken for rebellion outside. Norman guards panicked and set nearby buildings on fire. It was an omen. This new era would be built on tension. William moved quickly to secure control. He rewarded his Norman followers with land and titles. Anglo-Saxon elites were removed or crushed. A new ruling class took over England almost overnight. But London needed more than laws and titles. It needed fear. Near the eastern edge of the city, beside the River Thames, William ordered the construction of a massive fortress. Built of stone, unlike anything most Londoners had seen before, it rose above the city as a warning. This was the Tower of London. The White Tower, its central keep, was designed to dominate the skyline. Thick walls, narrow windows, a symbol of absolute authority. It was a fortress, a palace, and a prison all in one. To the people of London, the message was clear. The Normans were here to stay. Yet William did not destroy London. He reshaped it. He understood its value too well to ruin it. Instead, he used it. London remained at the center of trade and administration. The old Roman walls were repaired and maintained. The Thames continued to bring wealth into the city. But the city was changing. Norman French became the language of power. English remained the language of the people. This divide shaped medieval society. Law, court, and governance spoke one tongue. Streets and markets spoke another. London became a city of layers. By the 12th century, medieval London was growing fast. Its population expanded. New buildings filled empty spaces. Suburbs spread beyond the old walls. The city was crowded. Houses were built close together, mostly from wood. Streets were narrow and dark. Waste was thrown into open drains or directly into the river. Fires were common and devastating. Life was dangerous. But life was also full. Markets defined medieval London. They were the heart of daily activity. Cheapside became the city's main commercial street, packed with stalls selling bread, meat, cloth, spices, and tools. Merchants shouted prices. Buyers argued. Animals were slaughtered in public. The smell of food, smoke, and waste filled the air. Trade guilds emerged to control quality and protect members. Bakers, butchers, goldsmiths, weavers, each craft had rules, apprentices, and masters. These guilds became powerful, shaping both the economy and politics of the city. London was no longer just a royal city. It was a merchant city. The Thames was busier than ever. Ships arrived from across Europe, wine from France, timber from the Baltic, silk and spices through long trade routes. London's docks were crowded with cranes, barrels, and workers. Wealth flowed into the city. With wealth came influence. Londoners began demanding rights. Kings needed money, and London could provide it. In exchange, the city gained charters granting self-governance. By the late medieval period, London elected its own mayor. This was revolutionary. London was becoming a power in its own right. Religion dominated medieval life. Churches were everywhere. Bells rang constantly, marking time, prayer, and warning. Faith shaped how people understood the world, disease, death, and destiny. Westminster Abbey became a spiritual and political center. Kings were crowned and buried there. It symbolized continuity and legitimacy. St. Paul's Cathedral stood at the heart of the city, not just a church, but a meeting place, a market, and a center of news. People gathered there to talk, argue, and exchange ideas. Monasteries and convents cared for the sick and poor. Charity was tied to faith. Life was harsh, and belief offered meaning. But medieval London was not peaceful. Crime was common. Punishments were brutal and public. Thieves were hanged. Traitors were executed. Justice was meant to be seen and feared. Disease haunted the city. Plagues struck repeatedly, but none compared to what came in the 14th century, the Black Death. In 1348, the plague arrived in London. It spread quickly through crowded streets and filthy conditions. Entire families died within days. Bodies piled up faster than they could be buried. Perhaps half the city's population died. London was transformed. Labor became scarce. Survivors demanded higher wages. Old social structures weakened. The power balance between nobles and workers shifted. Out of tragedy came change. The later medieval period saw London recover and grow stronger. Stone buildings replaced wood. Regulations improved. Trade expanded further. But conflict remained. In 1381, the Peasants' Revolt shook England. Rebels marched into London, attacking symbols of authority. They executed officials and burned records. The city was once again at the center of national crisis. And yet, London survived. It always did. By the 15th century, London was firmly established as England's capital. Kings ruled from it. Parliament met there. Law, trade, and culture flowed outward from its streets. The Tower of London remained a symbol of royal power. Prisoners passed through its gates. Executions took place nearby. It stood as a reminder that authority rested on force as well as law. Medieval London was noisy, crowded, dangerous, and alive. It was a place of opportunity and suffering, of faith and fear, of wealth and inequality. Most importantly, it was permanent. For the first time, London was no longer just surviving the end of empires. It was becoming an empire's heart. Everything that followed, the Renaissance, the Reformation, the fires and revolutions, would build upon this medieval foundation, stone by stone, street by street, life by life. London had entered history not as a victim of change, but as its engine. And in the next chapter, we will see how disaster and rebirth reshaped the city once again, pushing it toward the modern world. By the 13th century, medieval London was no longer just a royal stronghold, it was a living organism. Every morning, the city woke to the sound of bells, carts, and voices. Smoke rose from hundreds of hearths. Traders opened stalls. Laborers gathered for work. Priests prepared for prayer. London moved because its people moved. Most Londoners lived hard lives. The majority were craftsmen, laborers, servants, or apprentices. Their homes were small, built from timber and plaster, often shared by large families. Privacy did not exist. Rooms served many purposes. Cooking, sleeping, working, all happened in the same space. Food was simple. Bread was a foundation of the diet. Meat was expensive and usually eaten only on special occasions. Fish was common, especially on religious fast days. Ale was safer than water and consumed daily, even by children. The streets were narrow and filthy. Waste was dumped outside. Animals roamed freely. Rats thrived. Disease spread easily. Fire was a constant fear. One spark could destroy entire neighborhoods. 2. Control chaos. Rules were strict. Curfews were enforced. Markets were regulated. Trades were inspected. Punishments were public and brutal. Stocks, pillories, whippings, and executions were meant to discourage crime through humiliation and fear. Justice was swift and unforgiving. Thieves lost hands. Traitors lost heads. The law favored the powerful, but order mattered to everyone. Without it, the city would collapse. Women's lives were shaped by limitation, but not silence. Many women worked as brewers, traders, midwives, and shopkeepers. Widows could inherit businesses. In markets, women sold food and goods daily. Yet legally, their rights were restricted, especially after marriage. Still, medieval London relied on women far more than laws admitted. Children worked early. Apprenticeships began young. Boys learned trades. Girls helped at home or in shops. Childhood was short. Survival mattered more than innocence. Religion touched everything. The church dictated time, morality, and meaning. Feast days and fasts structured the calendar. Bells told people when to pray, work, and rest. Fear of sin shaped behavior. Churches were everywhere. Some were grand. Others were simple parish buildings. All offered comfort, discipline, and identity. Death was constant, and faith explained it. Guilds became the backbone of the city. Each trade had its own guild, controlling quality, prices, and training. Membership meant security and support. Guilds also provided charity, cared for widows, and funded religious events. Over time, guild leaders gained political power. London's government grew stronger. The city elected sheriffs, aldermen, and a mayor. Royal authority remained, but London increasingly managed its own affairs. Kings depended on London's money. London used that leverage. This relationship was tense but productive. When kings respected London's rights, cooperation followed. When they did not, resistance grew. Conflict was never far away. Riots broke out over food shortages, taxes, and corruption. Foreign merchants were sometimes attacked. Class resentment simmered beneath daily life. Then came disaster. In 1348, the Black Death returned. Once again, death filled the streets. Entire parishes vanished. Priests died faster than replacements could be found. Burial grounds overflowed. London was traumatized. But something unexpected happened. The survivors gained power. Labor shortages forced wages up. Workers demanded rights. Old feudal structures weakened. Social mobility increased. London emerged, changed. The late medieval city was more regulated, more stone-built, and more assertive. Fire laws improved. Streets were widened. Markets reorganized. Trade expanded again. London became the financial heart of England. Merchants financed kings, wars, and exploration. Wealth reshaped the skyline, and the Tower of London still watched. It remained a prison for political enemies, a treasury, a fortress, a symbol that royal power, though negotiated, was never gone. By the 15th century, medieval London was crowded, confident, and restless. It had survived conquest, plague, revolt, and fire. It had learned to govern itself without rejecting the crown. It had grown from a controlled city into a partner of power. Medieval London was not beautiful. It was not clean. It was not fair, but it was strong. And it was ready for the next transformation. The medieval world was ending. New ideas were coming. Religion would fracture. Kings would challenge the church. Fire would test the... There are moments in a city's life when survival itself becomes the story. Moments when history does not move forward through kings, wars, or empires, but through fear, loss, and thoughts. For London, two such moments stand above all others. The plague and the fire. Each arrived without mercy. Each tore the city apart. And each forced London to answer the same question. Can we begin again? The shadow of death. By the mid-14th century, London was the largest city in England. Its streets were crowded. Its markets were busy. Its churches rang with life. But beneath the noise and movement, danger was always present. The city was filthy. Waste ran through open drains. Animals lived alongside people. Clean water was rare. Houses were packed tightly together. Disease spread as silently. Then, in 1348, death arrived. It came on ships. Merchant vessels sailing from Europe brought more than goods. They carried rats, fleas, and something far worse. The Black Death had reached England, and London stood directly in its path. At first, people did not understand what was happening. Healthy men collapsed in the streets. Fever burned through bodies. Dark swellings appeared in the neck, armpits, and groin. Victims died within days, sometimes within hours. Fear spread faster than the disease. Families locked themselves indoors. Neighbors avoided one another. The sick were abandoned. Doctors fled. Priests continued prayers until they too began to fall. London became a city of bells. Funeral bells rang constantly, so often that people stopped counting. Mass graves were dug outside the city walls. Bodies were piled into pits, covered quickly, and forgotten. There was no cure. There was no escape. Perhaps half of London's population died. The entire streets were emptied. Shops closed. Churches stood silent. Children were left orphaned. Houses stood abandoned, their owners gone forever. For those who survived, the city felt unreal. Silence replaced noise. Fear replaced routine. Death replaced order. Many believed the plague was divine punishment. Others blamed foreigners, the poor, or imagined enemies. Violence broke out. Desperation ruled. But then, slowly, the plague faded. Not because it was defeated, but because it burned itself out, and London was left to rebuild a broken world. A changed city after the Black Death. London was not the same city. Labor was scarce. Workers demanded higher wages. Old feudal controls weakened. Social mobility increased. The balance of power shifted. For the first time, ordinary people had leverage. The city government strengthened regulations. Public health became a concern, though understanding remained limited. Graveyards expanded. Hospitals grew. Charitable institutions became essential. London survived the plague, but it never forgot it. For centuries, outbreaks returned again and again. Each time, the city endured. Each time, it adapted. Plague became part of London's identity, a constant shadow hanging over daily life. Then came the 17th century, and with it, the worst year London would ever face. The Great Plague of 1665. By the 1660s, London was a growing global city. Trade flowed in from across the world. The population had houses leaned over narrow streets. Conditions were perfect for disaster. In 1665, plague returned with terrifying force. This time, records exist. Weekly death bills tracked the numbers. At first, they rose slowly, then sharply, then uncontrollably. By summer, thousands were dying every week. Red crosses were painted on infected houses. Doors were sealed shut. Families were locked inside with the sick. Guards were posted to prevent escape. The wealthy fled the city. King Charles II left London. So did nobles, merchants, and officials. The poor remained. Gravediggers worked day and night. Carts rolled through streets, collecting bodies. The sound of crying filled the air. Dogs and cats were killed in mass culls, wrongly blamed for spreading disease. By the time the plague faded in 1666, an estimated 100,000 Londoners were dead. Nearly 1/4 of the city. London was exhausted, broken, traumatized. And then, the fire came. The night London burned. In the early hours of September 2nd, 1666, a small fire broke out in a bakery on Pudding Lane. It should have been contained. But London was dry. Houses were wooden. Streets were narrow. The wind was strong. The fire spread fast. Within hours, entire streets were burning. Flames jumped from house to house. Roofs collapsed. Sparks flew across the city. Panic took over. People fled, carrying whatever they could. Furniture, clothing, children, religious relics. Everything else was abandoned. For 4 days, the fire raged. Churches burned. Markets vanished. Homes collapsed. St. Paul's Cathedral caught fire and fell in flames. The medieval city was destroyed. 80% of London inside the walls was reduced to ash. Miraculously, few lives were lost. But everything else was gone. The city that had survived plague after plague was now homeless. Ashes and opportunity. When the fire finally died, London stood silent again. But this silence was different. This time, there was no disease, no mass death, no fear of contagion. There was only destruction. From the ashes came possibility. For the first time in centuries, London could be redesigned. Architects proposed grand plans, wide boulevards, stone buildings, open spaces, a modern city. But reality intervened. People needed homes quickly. Property rights were complex. Money was limited. Grand visions were scaled back. Still, change came. Wooden buildings were banned. Stone and brick replaced timber. Streets were widened. Fire regulations were enforced. London would never burn like that again. Sir Christopher Wren became the face of rebuilding. He redesigned St. Paul's Cathedral, creating one of the greatest landmarks in the world. Dozens of churches rose across the city, symbols of rebirth and resilience. Trade returned. Life resumed. London rebuilt itself. A city reborn. The Great Fire did not end London. It transformed it. The medieval city was gone, but a modern one was emerging. Stronger, safer, more confident. London expanded beyond its old walls. New neighborhoods formed. Commerce grew rapidly. The city became the center of a growing empire. Plague would return one last time. But after 1666, London's story changed. It had faced death. It had faced destruction, and it had chosen survival. Again, this chapter is not about tragedy alone. It is about refusal. Refusal to collapse. Refusal to disappear. Refusal to be defined by disaster. London burned. London mourned. London rebuilt. And from fire and plague, it emerged not weaker, but stronger. A city that had learned the ultimate lesson of history. No matter how complete the destruction, London would rise again. After the flames died and the last embers faded, London faced a new challenge. Survival was no longer about escaping disease or fire. It was about rebuilding, planning, and imagining a city that could endure for centuries. The destruction was near total. 80% of buildings inside the city walls had been reduced to ash. St. Paul's Cathedral, the pride of London, had collapsed, leaving only rubble where the Great Dome once stood. Homes, workshops, warehouses, and churches had vanished in days. Streets that had carried the pulse of life for centuries were now empty, yet Londoners were not strangers to loss. They had survived plague after plague. Death had shadowed every generation, but fire was a different test. This was not an invisible enemy like the plague. The devastation was visible, immediate, and total. And still, people returned. Citizens came back to salvage what they could. Some searched for remnants of family heirlooms. Others cleared debris from plots they had once called home. Makeshift shelters appeared in the ruins. The Thames, still flowing as it had for millennia, became both lifeline and transport route for materials. Barges carried stone, timber, and supplies from upriver towns. People improvised. They dug foundations, erected temporary walls, and slowly began to reclaim the city. The government acted quickly. London had already gained experience managing crises through centuries of plague and political upheaval. Officials, led by the Lord Mayor and city aldermen, imposed emergency regulations to restore order. Fire safety rules were created. Wooden buildings were banned inside the city walls, and brick and stone were required for new construction. Streets were widened to prevent future fires from spreading uncontrollably. These measures were radical but necessary, a recognition that survival required adaptation. Trade, the lifeblood of London, also had to be restored. Merchants returned to temporary stalls along cleared streets. Markets reopened slowly, first for essential goods, then for textiles, spices, and imported luxury items. The city's docks on the Thames were repaired and reinforced, enabling cargo ships to dock safely once again. Traders from the Low Countries, France, and the Mediterranean returned, bringing goods, wealth, and news. Commerce was not just restored, it became the engine for recovery. One of the most visible symbols of rebuilding was St. Paul's Cathedral. Sir Christopher Wren, appointed after the fire, undertook an ambitious plan to design a new cathedral. The old medieval structure was gone, replaced with a bold vision of Renaissance architecture. Foundations were dug carefully. Stone was quarried, cut, and shaped with meticulous precision. The new dome, rising above the city, would take decades to complete. But even under construction, it became a beacon of resilience, reminding Londoners that the city would rise from destruction. Religious life also adapted. Parish churches, some destroyed completely, were rebuilt in brick or stone, often incorporating lessons from the fire. The church continued to provide structure, solace, and moral guidance for a population still scarred by the plague and fire. Charity grew more organized, with hospitals and almshouses offering support to those who had lost everything. Faith became intertwined with civic responsibility, guiding the city's moral and social rebuilding. Social structures shifted as well. The labor shortages caused by repeated plagues meant workers had more bargaining power than ever before. Skilled masons, carpenters, and laborers could demand better wages, and some social mobility became possible, while wealth remained concentrated among merchants and the aristocracy. The city's survival depended on cooperation across classes. Every builder, every laborer, Every merchant played a role in restoring life to the streets. Life after the fire was dangerous but determined. Temporary housing was cramped. Disease continued to pose a threat. Food shortages and economic instability were real concerns. Yet the city persisted. Londoners rebuilt homes quickly, often using salvaged materials, and gradually replaced wooden houses with more durable brick structures. Streets became more organized. And city planning, once chaotic, gained a new logic. Governance adapted to these changes. London's officials became more proactive, balancing royal authority with local autonomy. Charters and regulations reinforced the city's ability to manage its own affairs. For the first time, urban planning, fire safety, trade regulation, and public health were considered interconnected aspects of governance. The experience of plague and fire had taught London that survival depended on structure, foresight, and cooperation. By the early 1670s, London was transformed. Markets were bustling. Streets were lined with stone and brick buildings. St. Paul's Cathedral, though incomplete, dominated the skyline. Trade flowed robustly along the Thames. The city had learned from disaster, reshaping itself not only to survive but to thrive. London's resilience became legendary. The city had faced one of history's deadliest pandemics and one of its most destructive fires, and yet it emerged stronger. New building standards, improved infrastructure, and a reinvigorated economy set the stage for the modern city to come. Lessons from these disasters were embedded in the city's identity. Careful planning, public regulation, and human determination could withstand even the most devastating events. Plague, fire, and survival were more than events in London's history. They were defining chapters in the city's character. London learned that it could endure. It learned that destruction, no matter how total, was not the end. And it learned that a city's people, the laborers, traders, builders, and officials, were as vital to its survival as any wall, gate, or tower. From these ashes and losses, London emerged into the next era. A city more organized, more resilient, and more determined than ever before. A city ready to embrace expansion, commerce, and influence on a national and international stage. The stage was set for the age of empire, trade, and global connections, all built upon the lessons of plague and fire. London's story, time and again, demonstrated a simple truth. The city's greatest strength was its ability to endure. From medieval streets reduced to ash, from crowded homes emptied by disease, from despair and fear, London rebuilt itself not as a shadow of the past, but as a stronger, more confident city, poised to become one of the greatest in the world. Power, culture, and the city that shaped an era. By the early 16th century, London was no longer just a city of survival. It had endured plagues, fires, and invasions. Its streets were rebuilt in stone and brick. Its economy was vibrant. Its institutions were stronger. And yet, a new age was dawning, one that would challenge London not with destruction, but with transformation. This was the age of the Tudors. Henry VIII. Ambition and authority. Henry VIII ascended the throne in 1509, a young king of extraordinary energy and ambition. London, as the capital, became the stage for his vision. The city was now the center of English political life. Royal palaces, like Whitehall and Westminster, became hubs of administration, ceremony, and spectacle. Londoners witnessed the king's power daily. Processions, proclamations, and the strict enforcement of royal authority shaped life in the streets. But Henry's most dramatic impact on London came through religion. Dissatisfied with the Pope in Rome, he broke from the Catholic Church, creating the Church of England. The dissolution of the monasteries between 1536 and 1541 emptied wealth and land from the monasteries, some of which were sold, some repurposed. This reshaped London physically and economically. Monastic lands were developed into private estates and commercial spaces. Religious life changed. The church remained central, but under the control of the crown. Londoners learned to navigate this new order. Faith, wealth, and politics intertwined more tightly than ever before. Henry's reign also brought the human cost of power. Public executions, displays of royal favor, and harsh punishment were part of the spectacle of authority. Londoners lived with both awe and fear, witnessing the reach of their king firsthand. Yet the city continued to grow. The Thames remained a hub of trade. Markets thrived. Merchants, craftsmen, and artisans found opportunity in the growing demand for goods, services, and building projects. Elizabeth I. Flourishing and ambition. By the time Elizabeth I became queen in 1558, London had become not just a center of power but a cultural capital. Elizabeth's long reign brought stability after decades of religious upheaval. The city became a canvas for the ambitions of artists, writers, and entrepreneurs. Trade expanded dramatically. Merchants connected London to Europe, the Mediterranean, and increasingly to the Atlantic world. Goods from Italy, Spain, and beyond filled the markets. Silks, wines, spices, and luxury items for the emerging middle class. London's economy thrived on commerce, and its wealth drew attention from every corner of the country. The streets of Elizabethan London were alive in ways unlike any previous age. Theatres, taverns, and markets buzzed with life. The south bank of the Thames became the center of popular culture, with theatres like the Theatre and later the Globe offering performances for the masses. Playwrights flourished, the most famous of whom was William Shakespeare. His plays captured the spirit of the city, the tensions of power, and the vibrancy of human experience. Shakespeare's London was a city of stories, of ambition, comedy, and tragedy. Elizabeth also consolidated royal power. London became the political heart of England. Parliament met in Westminster. Royal proclamations were published, and the city's officials ensured that law and order reflected the will of the crown. The monarchy depended on London's wealth, and London depended on the crown's protection. This relationship, delicate but vital, shaped governance and culture alike. Culture and daily life. For ordinary Londoners, life was both exciting and dangerous. Streets were crowded. Markets overflowed with goods. People of all classes mingled in public spaces, from laborers and merchants to nobles and courtiers. Public executions, including those at Tyburn, reminded citizens of the consequences of disobedience. Disease remained a constant threat, but daily life carried on with energy and resilience. London's population grew rapidly during the Tudor period. Timber-framed houses lined narrow streets, often leaning over the roadway. Shops opened on the ground floor, with living spaces above. Noise, smoke, and activity filled the air. Taverns and inns catered to travelers and locals alike. The city's expansion pushed beyond its old medieval walls into fields and farmland, which slowly became neighborhoods. Religious life remained central, despite shifts between Protestantism and Catholicism under different monarchs. Churches offered guidance, charity, and social cohesion. Festivals, holy days, and processions punctuated the calendar. Religion was public, political, and personal all at once. Streets alive with power, culture, and conflict. By the late 16th century, London's streets were a living, breathing organism. The city had grown far beyond its medieval footprint. Timber-framed houses leaned over narrow alleys. Markets thrived along Cheapside, Gracechurch Street, and the banks of the Thames. Merchants, artisans, laborers, and nobility all moved through the same streets, each playing a part in the city's ever-changing rhythm. The city was crowded, noisy, and unpredictable. Horse-drawn carts rattled over cobblestones. Cries of vendors filled the air, offering bread, meat, spices, and cloth. Children darted through the crowds. Dogs and livestock shared space with humans. Smoke from chimneys, tanneries, and bakeries filled the sky. Life was chaotic, but energy pulsed through every street. Markets and trade. Trade was the lifeblood of Tudor and Stuart London. The Thames remained central to the city's growth. Ships arrived daily, carrying goods from across England and Europe, wool from the countryside, wine from France, timber from Scandinavia, and exotic spices from the Mediterranean. Docks were crowded with sailors, merchants, and dock workers. Barges ferried goods up and down the river, linking London to national and international trade networks. Markets were hubs of both commerce and social interaction. Cheapside, the main thoroughfare, teemed with vendors. Butchers, bakers, and fishmongers competed for customers. Shoppers haggled, negotiated, and gossiped. Market life was lively, but often dangerous pickpockets and fraud were constant threats. Trade guilds controlled quality, trained apprentices, and protected their members' interests. Bakers, goldsmiths, shoemakers, and weavers all had their own guilds. Membership offered protection and opportunity, and guild leaders became influential figures in city governance. Guilds also sponsored festivals, religious processions, and charity, connecting commerce with civic life, culture, and entertainment. Elizabethan London was a city of spectacle. Theatres rose along the South Bank, outside the jurisdiction of strict city laws, where audiences of all classes could watch plays. William Shakespeare's works captured the imagination of the public, portraying kings, commoners, and everything in between. Playwrights thrived on the diversity of London's audiences, blending tragedy, comedy, and social commentary. Taverns and inns were social hubs. Patrons gathered to drink, eat, debate politics, and share news. Coffee houses began to appear during the Stuart period, becoming centers of intellectual discussion and business networking. London's culture was vibrant and public. Streets, taverns, and theaters were as important to civic life as churches or markets. Religion and daily life. Religion remained central. The Reformation had reshaped faith, but both Protestantism and remnants of Catholic tradition influenced daily life. Church attendance was expected, and festivals marked the calendar. Clergy offered guidance, education, and charity. Parish churches were focal points for local identity, while grander institutions like Westminster Abbey and St. Paul's Cathedral symbolized national power and continuity. Faith also shaped moral and social codes. Sunday laws restricted work and entertainment. Charity was a religious duty. Misbehavior, crime, or heresy could lead to punishment by the city or church authorities. Religion was intertwined with governance, trade, and social expectations, creating a structure within which Londoners navigated their lives. Plague and peril. Despite growth, the city remained vulnerable. Plague outbreaks recurred, killing thousands and disrupting daily life. Streets, crowded and unsanitary, were breeding grounds for disease. Citizens practiced quarantine measures, painted crosses on infected houses, and fled the city when possible. The recurring threat of disease influenced building patterns, health regulations, and city planning, laying early foundations for public health management. Women in Tudor and Stuart London. Women played essential roles in both households and the economy. Many worked as merchants, artisans, midwives, or innkeepers. Widows could inherit businesses and property, giving them unusual independence for the time. Women also managed households, educated children, and contributed to charitable work through churches and guilds. Though legally constrained, they were integral to the functioning and survival of the city. Politics and royal influence. Monarchy and city governance were intertwined. The crown relied on London for taxes, military support, and legitimacy. Citizens relied on royal protection and economic opportunity. This balance shaped life in the city. The Tower of London symbolized royal authority, but the city maintained its own administrative structures. Elected aldermen, sheriffs, and a mayor ensured that daily life continued despite political tensions. Public ceremonies reinforced this relationship. Royal entries, coronations, and proclamations displayed power and reminded citizens of their place within a national framework. At the same time, Londoners negotiated, petitioned, and influenced governance through trade wealth, guild influence, and civic participation. The city was a partner in power, not just a subject. Expansion and urban development. London expanded beyond its medieval walls. New neighborhoods grew along the Thames and into surrounding countryside. Roads and bridges improved connectivity. Inns, warehouses, and docks multiplied. Wealthier citizens built grand houses, while the poor crowded into timber-framed tenements. Expansion was chaotic but vibrant, reflecting the city's growth as a commercial, political, and cultural hub. The period also sought improvements in infrastructure. The street widening, fire prevention measures, and better sanitation, though limited, were introduced. Markets were reorganized. Bridges were reinforced. Public buildings rose to meet the demands of a growing population. London was becoming modern, yet still retained the chaos and unpredictability of medieval life. Legacy. By the early 17th century, London had transformed from a medieval city into a thriving metropolis of commerce, culture, and governance. Shakespeare's plays, royal spectacle, bustling markets, and civic organization created a city alive with energy and opportunity. Yet London remained fragile. Plague, fire, overcrowding, and political tensions were constant threats. Survival required resilience, adaptability, and cooperation across social classes. Citizens, artisans, merchants, and officials together shaped the city's identity. Tudor and Stuart London laid the foundations for the modern city. Its streets, markets, theaters, and riverbanks reflected centuries of adaptation, endurance, and ambition. The city had become a center of power, culture, and trade, poised for the challenges and transformations that the 17th and 18th centuries would bring. London had evolved once again, proving that no matter the threats of disease, fire, or political turmoil, it could survive and thrive. Its story was one of resilience, innovation, and human determination. Expansion and the Thames. The Thames continued to define London. Its riverbanks were crowded with docks, warehouses, and ships. Merchants moved goods from across Europe and the Atlantic. The river connected the city to trade networks that would later define the British Empire. London's identity was tied to commerce. Wealth flowed along the Thames, shaping streets, neighborhoods, and opportunities. Infrastructure began to improve. Bridges, like the Old London Bridge, were reinforced. New streets were laid out in response to the growing population. Inns and hostels accommodated travelers. London was a city of constant movement, a hub of ideas, goods, and ambition. Stuart London: growth, conflict, and transformation. The Tudor period transitioned into the Stuart era in 1603, when James I became king. London continued to grow, becoming increasingly crowded and complex. Population pressures led to denser neighborhoods. Trade intensified. The city's social fabric became more diverse, with immigrants from continental Europe and rural migrants seeking opportunity. Stuart London faced both promise and peril. Political tensions between monarchy and parliament created uncertainty. Economic disparities grew. The city remained vibrant but fragile, a hub of wealth and innovation, alongside poverty and disease. Plague outbreaks continued, reminding citizens that survival depended on adaptation and resilience. Culture flourished. However, theatres thrived along the South Bank. Shakespeare's plays were performed before monarchs and commoners alike. Literature, art, and music reflected both the energy and anxieties of the time. London was at the heart of English culture, a place where creativity and commerce collided. Royal power and civic growth. Monarchy and city governance were intertwined. Kings and queens relied on London for taxes, troops, and legitimacy. Citizens relied on royal protection, markets, and infrastructure. The Tower of London remained a symbol of authority and security. Westminster remained the seat of government and ceremony. London's institutions grew stronger, more organized, and more sophisticated. The city expanded physically. New streets, squares, and neighborhoods appeared. The old medieval walls could no longer contain its population. The city's footprint reached outward, transforming farmland and suburban villages into bustling neighborhoods. London was no longer just a medieval city. It was becoming a modern metropolis. Legacy of the Tudor and Stuart periods. By the end of the Stuart period, London had transformed dramatically. It had survived plague, political upheaval, and social change. It had become a center of commerce, culture, and governance. The city's population had grown rapidly. Its streets were crowded and chaotic, but full of energy and opportunity. The Thames remained the lifeblood of trade and expansion. London had become a city of contrasts. Wealth and poverty existed side by side. Theaters and taverns thrived alongside churches and markets. Authority and independence coexisted, sometimes uneasily, sometimes productively. Every aspect of the city reflected its dynamic nature, ambitious, resilient, and alive. The Tudor and Stuart periods shaped the London we recognize today. The foundations of commerce, culture, governance, and urban planning were laid. The city had grown beyond medieval constraints, emerging as the political, cultural, and economic heart of England. Its identity as a global city, tied to trade, culture, and royal authority, began in these centuries. London's streets, its theaters, its markets, and its riverbanks were more than physical spaces. They were living proof of endurance, creativity, and ambition. From Henry VIII to Elizabeth I, from Shakespeare to James I, London had become a city that could survive, adapt, and thrive in a rapidly changing world. And as the 17th century ended, London stood ready to face the next great challenges: disaster, fire, plague, and eventually, the Industrial Revolution. The city that had risen from medieval rubble, shaped by monarchy and culture, was poised to become one of the most powerful and influential cities in the world. Smoke, steam, and a city transformed. By the 18th century, London was no longer simply a city shaped by kings, playwrights, or royal spectacle. It had entered an age defined by machines, commerce, and unprecedented population growth. The Georgian era, followed by the Victorian, would transform the city in ways that its medieval and Tudor predecessors could never have imagined. The Industrial Revolution arrives. London's growth accelerated in the late 18th century. The Industrial Revolution reshaped Britain, and London became its heartbeat. Factories sprang up on the outskirts of the city, particularly in the East End, where space and cheap labor were available. Steam-powered machinery replaced handcrafts. Textiles, metalworks, and later machinery and chemical industries drew workers from the countryside. The Thames remained central, but now, not only as a trading route, it became a conduit for industrial goods. Barges carried coal, raw materials, and manufactured products. Warehouses multiplied along its banks. Docks were crowded with activity. Ships from across the world arrived in London, bringing goods from the empire, tea from India, sugar from the Caribbean, cotton from America, and spices from the Far East. The city's global importance grew daily. Yet industrialization brought challenges. The smoke from coal fires and factories filled the air, combining with soot from chimneys and streets, creating a haze that settled over the city. Rivers became polluted. Streets, crowded with horse-drawn carts and pedestrians, were chaotic. Noise, dust, and grime defined life in the expanding city. Population boom. London's population exploded. From roughly 600,000 in 1700, it grew to over 2 million by the mid-19th century. The city could barely contain its new residents. Housing shortages were extreme. Working-class families crowded into narrow streets and dark, unsanitary tenements. Courtyards and alleys became breeding grounds for disease. Cholera, typhoid, and smallpox outbreaks were frequent. Public health was a constant struggle. Despite these dangers, the city was full of energy. Markets, theaters, pubs, and churches thrived. Streets pulsed with people from all walks of life. Immigrants arrived from Ireland, continental Europe, and the colonies. London became a melting pot of languages, customs, and religions. The population boom created opportunity, but also inequality, shaping the social and political challenges of the city for decades to come. Wealth and poverty, side by side. One of the most striking features of Georgian and Victorian London was the extreme contrast between wealth and poverty. In the West End, grand terraces, squares, and townhouses reflected immense wealth. Nobles, successful merchants, and professionals lived in elegance. Street planning, public gardens, and well-maintained homes demonstrated social order, comfort, and access to culture. Georgian architecture, with its symmetry and classical style, became the mark of prosperity. Just a few miles away, in the East End and Southwark, life was dramatically different. Narrow alleys, overcrowded tenements, and poor sanitation characterized working-class neighborhoods. Families of 10 or more often lived in a single room. Children worked in factories, workshops, or as chimney sweeps. From a young age, disease was constant. Crime, petty theft, and prostitution were part of everyday survival. This contrast defined the city. Wealth and poverty existed side by side, a constant reminder of the social challenges created by industrial growth. The city's expansion was both magnificent and grim. Londoners lived in a city of extremes, railways, and transportation. The 19th century introduced the railway, revolutionizing the movement of people and goods. London became the center of an ever-expanding network, connecting it to the rest of Britain. Termini such as Euston, Paddington, and King's Cross became bustling hubs. Trains carried raw materials into the city and manufactured goods outward. Commuters traveled from surrounding towns, creating a new suburban landscape. Within the city, horse-drawn omnibuses, and later steam-powered vehicles, improved mobility. Bridges across the Thames were widened, and new streets cut through old neighborhoods to accommodate traffic. Transportation reshaped how Londoners lived, worked, and socialized, knitting the growing metropolis together. Social reform and public health. Industrialization and urbanization brought urgent problems. Overcrowding, disease, and pollution demanded action. The government and local authorities began implementing reforms. Sanitation became a priority. The Great Stink of 1858, when the Thames overflowed with sewage, forced immediate action. Joseph Bazalgette designed and oversaw the construction of a modern sewer system, transforming public health. Hospitals and charitable institutions expanded, offering care to the poor and sick. Education became more accessible. Schools, both religious and public, were established to teach reading, writing, and practical skills. Literacy rose, empowering citizens and workers. Labor reform gradually improved conditions. Factory acts limited child labor and restricted working hours. Trade unions emerged, allowing workers to organize and demand better wages. While reform was slow and incomplete, Londoners began to see the possibility of change in response to industrial pressures. Culture and entertainment. Despite hardships, cultural life flourished. Theaters, music halls, and exhibitions offered entertainment for every class. Museums, galleries, and libraries expanded access to knowledge. Literature thrived, with authors like Charles Dickens depicting the realities of urban life, poverty, and social reform. Art, science, and literature reflected the energy, struggles, and imagination of a city in transition. Pubs and coffeehouses remained central to social life. They were spaces for conversation, business, and debate. London was a city of voices, political, literary, and commercial. Its streets, from the West End to the docks of the East, were alive with discussion, negotiation, and creativity. Industrial labor and daily life for workers was harsh. Factories demanded long hours, often 6 days a week. Children were employed in dangerous conditions. Homes were cramped and lacking ventilation. Yet, there was opportunity. Skilled laborers could rise in social status. Apprenticeships, guild-like societies, and emerging middle-class trades offered a pathway to stability. Food, clothing, and basic services became commodities for mass consumption. Markets sold imported goods. Bakeries, butchers, and dairies catered to growing neighborhoods. The city's economy depended on constant circulation, money, labor, and goods moving ceaselessly through its streets and docks. Crime, policing, and justice. Population growth and urbanization brought new challenges in law enforcement. Street crime, theft, and gang activity increased. The Metropolitan Police, established in 1829 by Sir Robert Peel, represented the first organized effort to manage crime professionally. London's legal system evolved alongside the city, balancing enforcement with reform and addressing social issues exacerbated by poverty. Prisons expanded, but reform movements began advocating for rehabilitation. Social reformers, writers, and philanthropists highlighted the struggles of the poor, influencing public opinion and legislation. The city became a laboratory for social change, with reformers testing new ideas in education, housing, health, and labor. London as a global hub. By the Victorian era, London was the largest city in the world. Its influence extended across the British Empire and beyond. Trade, finance, and culture made it a global hub. The Bank of England, shipping companies, and colonial trade networks centered on the city. London's residents were connected to a vast world through commerce, migration, and ideas. Yet global prominence brought responsibility. The city faced constant pressure to manage population growth, urban planning, and social inequity. Public works, transportation projects, and regulatory reforms sought to balance expansion with livability. Legacy of Georgian and Victorian London. Georgian and Victorian London was a city of extremes, wealth and poverty, innovation and danger, opportunity and struggle. Its streets bore witness to industrial power, human suffering, and extraordinary creativity. The city had adapted once again, this time not through survival alone, but through reinvention. Factories, railways, and the Thames created a network of commerce. Public health reforms, schools, and law enforcement began to mitigate the costs of industrialization. Culture flourished in theaters, music halls, and literature, reflecting the vibrancy and complexity of urban life. By the end of the 19th century, London had emerged as a city of global significance. Prepared to face the challenges of modernity, its foundations, medieval walls, Tudor theaters, Stuart trade, and Victorian industry created a metropolis capable of enduring catastrophe and embracing opportunity. London's identity as a resilient, adaptive, and ambitious city had been forged once again. London, the capital of a global age. By the late 18th century, London had transformed from a city defined by medieval streets and Tudor theaters into the beating heart of a global empire. It was no longer merely the capital of England. It was the center of the British Empire, commanding trade, finance, politics, and culture across continents. The city had grown exponentially. The streets that had once been filled with timber-framed houses now hosted grand Georgian terraces, markets, banks, and government buildings. The Thames, the city's ancient lifeline, was crowded with ships from every corner of the world, carrying goods, wealth, and ideas. London's skyline, punctuated by church spires, warehouses, and bridges, reflected the city's ambition and reach. London and global trade. The rise of the British Empire transformed London into the world's trading hub. Ships from India, the Caribbean, Africa, and the Americas docked at the city's ports, unloading tea, sugar, spices, cotton, tobacco, and precious metals. London merchants controlled vast networks of trade, connecting distant colonies to the city's markets and warehouses. The East India Company became a symbol of London's global influence. Founded in 1600, it grew into a powerful commercial and political force, governing territories in India, controlling trade routes, and enriching the city's elite. London's merchants and financiers profited enormously, building mansions, funding cultural institutions, and investing in further trade ventures. The wealth generated by global trade reshaped the city's neighborhoods. The West End displayed elegance and affluence, with squares, theaters, and private clubs. The East End, by contrast, housed dockworkers, laborers, and immigrants drawn to employment opportunities. Commerce defined social structure. Every aspect of life in London, from food and clothing to culture and politics, was intertwined with the empire. Finance and the city of money. London became the financial capital of the world. The Bank of England, founded in 1694, financed the government, wars, and trade ventures. Insurance companies, stockbrokers, and merchants created the first modern financial networks. The Royal Exchange, the heart of London's commerce, buzzed with activity. Merchants, bankers, and traders conducted deals that could ripple across continents. Finance shaped politics. The city's wealth allowed Londoners to influence national decisions. Government depended on loans, taxes, and trade revenue generated in the city. London became the place where money, power, and policy converged, giving it influence far beyond its borders. Political power. As the heart of the empire, London was a center of political authority. The Houses of Parliament, Whitehall, and Downing Street were where policies affecting millions were debated and decided. The monarchy retained symbolic power, but the rise of Parliament, cabinet government, and political parties meant that Londoners, especially merchants, landowners, and professionals, had a voice in shaping the nation and its empire. The city also witnessed political conflict and protest. Londoners marched for reform, protested taxes, and debated rights. Riots and demonstrations were part of life, reflecting a citizenry aware of its influence. The expansion of suffrage and civic engagement in the 19th century showed how Londoners could shape policy and society in ways unmatched in earlier centuries. Cultural influence. Culture flourished alongside commerce and politics. London's theaters, galleries, and concert halls attracted audiences from all classes. Shakespeare's legacy persisted, while new playwrights, novelists, and composers reflected contemporary life, empire, and society. The British Museum, founded in 1753, symbolized London's role as a repository of global knowledge, housing treasures brought from across the empire. Printing presses spread news, literature, and ideas. Newspapers, pamphlets, and books made London a center of information and debate. Coffee houses became hubs for intellectual discussion, business planning, and political debate. London's culture was cosmopolitan, reflecting the diversity of the empire and the global reach of its people. Society and class. London's population was vast and diverse. The wealthy lived in comfort in areas like Mayfair, Westminster, and Kensington. The middle-class professionals, merchants, and skilled artisans thrived in urban neighborhoods across the city. The working class, dock workers, factory laborers, and servants crowded the East End and Southwark, often living in unsanitary conditions. Immigration increased dramatically. Irish, Jewish, and continental European communities brought their languages, traditions, and labor to the city. The influx of people fueled trade, labor, and culture, but also created tension and overcrowding. London became a city of contrasts. Wealth and poverty, opportunity and struggle. Progress and social challenge existed side by side. Innovation and infrastructure. Industrial and technological advances transformed London. Railways connected the city to the countryside and other industrial centers. The London Underground, the first in the world, revolutionized transport and commuting. Bridges, docks, and warehouses expanded to accommodate trade and population growth. Street lighting, gas lamps, and improved sanitation slowly made urban life more manageable. The city also pioneered modern institutions. Hospitals, schools, and public services grew to meet the demands of a rapidly expanding population. Police and fire services professionalized, creating systems of order to support the complex metropolis. London was no longer a collection of neighborhoods. It was a global city with systems to sustain its influence. Empire and influence. Every facet of London's life reflected the empire. Wealth from colonies funded banks, museums, universities, and theaters. Goods from distant lands filled markets and homes. News of political developments, conflicts, and discoveries arrived daily. Londoners lived in a city connected to the globe. The city was also a symbol. London represented British power, culture, and identity to the world. Ambassadors, traders, and dignitaries visited, witnessing the scale of wealth, governance, and culture. London's skyline, docks, and public buildings conveyed the might of the empire. Yet the city's success relied on labor, industry, and trade that were often harsh or exploitative. Dock workers unloaded ships under grueling conditions. Factory laborers endured long hours and low pay. Slavery, colonial exploitation, and economic inequality were intertwined with London's prosperity. The city's greatness came with human cost, shaping the social conscience of reformers, writers, and politicians. Legacy of empire. By the late 19th and early 20th centuries, London had firmly established itself as the heart of a global empire. Its influence extended through commerce, finance, politics, culture, and education. The city was a hub for innovation, social reform, and international exchange. London's streets, docks, and institutions reflected centuries of adaptation, resilience, and ambition. From medieval survival to Tudor spectacle, from Victorian industry to imperial reach, the city had grown into a metropolis capable of shaping the world. Its identity as a global capital was inseparable from its history, architecture, commerce, and culture. London's story in the age of empire was one of contrasts. Wealth and poverty, order and chaos, opportunity and struggle. Its population was diverse, its economy vast, its cultural influence unmatched. The city was both a home for millions and a symbol of British power abroad. Every street, bridge, dock, and institution was part of a network that spanned continents and oceans, linking the daily lives of Londoners to the farthest reaches of the empire. By the end of the 19th century, London had become the capital, not only of England, but of an empire that spanned the globe. Its wealth, culture, governance, and trade networks made it central to world affairs. The city's challenges overcrowding, disease, social inequality persisted, but so did its resilience. London had proven that it could grow, adapt, and thrive on a scale unmatched in history. Its streets, theaters, banks, and docks told the story of a city that transformed from medieval survival to global dominance. And as the 20th century approached, London stood ready to face wars, technological change, social reform, and cultural evolution, continuing the legacy of a city that had always risen to meet the challenges of its age. Life in the global capital. By the height of the British Empire, London was no longer just a political or financial center of the nation. It was a city that reflected the entire world. Its streets, docks, and neighborhoods were alive with the influence of distant colonies, international trade, and the constant movement of people and ideas. Streets of diversities. The city's population had swelled dramatically. By the late 19th century, London was home to over 6 million people. Immigrants arrived from across Europe and the Empire. Irish laborers fleeing famine, Jewish families escaping persecution in Eastern Europe, and skilled workers from continental Europe all found a place in the city. The docks brought sailors and merchants from India, Africa, and the Caribbean, who settled in neighborhoods around the Thames. This diversity transformed daily life. Markets offered goods from across the empire: Indian spices, Caribbean sugar, African textiles, and Chinese tea. Pubs and cafes echoed with multiple languages. London became a cultural mosaic, where traditions collided, adapted, and enriched the urban experience. Street food, clothing, and music reflected this global influence long before the era of globalization. The workforce and social change. London's economy depended on an immense workforce. Factories, docks, offices, and shops employed millions. Men, women, and children labored long hours under challenging conditions. The contrast between wealth and poverty was stark. While bankers, merchants, and professionals in the West End lived in comfort, dock workers, factory laborers, and domestic servants often endured overcrowded housing and low wages. Yet this era also saw the rise of reform and activism. Trade unions gained influence. Labor laws were gradually improved, and philanthropic organizations began addressing poverty and public health. Education, too, became more widely available. Schools for working-class children opened, offering basic literacy, numeracy, and vocational skills. Londoners increasingly saw opportunity as intertwined with education and social organization. Governance and the empire. As the heart of the empire, London was the seat of political power. Parliament in Westminster decided the laws that governed millions across the globe. The monarchy retained ceremonial influence, but ministers, administrators, and diplomats ran the machinery of government. Civic governance evolved to manage the city's unprecedented growth. Police forces, fire brigades, and public works departments centralized sanitation systems, including Joseph Bazalgette's sewer network, combated disease. Hospitals and charitable institutions expanded to meet the needs of the growing urban population. London became an organized, functioning hub, capable of supporting the operations of an empire. Cultural influence. Culture flourished alongside commerce and governance. London's theaters, concert halls, museums, and galleries were open to a broader public than ever before. The British Museum, National Gallery, and Victoria and Albert Museum displayed treasures from across the empire, reinforcing the city's global status. Literature, art, and science thrived. Authors like Charles Dickens and Arthur Conan Doyle depicted the realities of life in a rapidly changing metropolis. Science and innovation were celebrated at institutions like the Royal Society. The city's coffeehouses, clubs, and salons were forums for debate, discussion, and intellectual exchange. Ideas, news, and innovations traveled quickly, spreading influence far beyond London itself. In this way, the city shaped not just commerce and politics, but culture and thought across the empire and the world. Education and knowledge. London became a center of learning and knowledge. Universities, schools, and libraries expanded. Imperial College and the University of London, along with countless specialized institutions, trained professionals who would serve across the empire. Scientific discoveries, industrial innovations, and literary achievements were concentrated in the city. making it both a repository of knowledge and a global influencer. Education was also a tool for social mobility. Children from working-class families gained skills that allowed them to rise in commerce, civil service, or skilled trades. This contributed to the dynamic character of the city, blending opportunity with challenge. Immigration and global exchange. Immigration brought new energy, ideas, and labor to London. Sailors, merchants, artisans, and refugees contributed to the city's diversity. Ethnic neighborhoods emerged, each with its own shops, religious institutions, and cultural practices. The fusion of cultures enriched music, food, clothing, and festivals. Creating a city that was cosmopolitan long before the modern era, the city also became a hub for international diplomacy. Ambassadors, consuls, and travelers arrived, negotiating trade, alliances, and cultural exchange. London was a place where local life intersected with global politics, economics, and culture on a daily basis. Wealth, class, and social tensions. Despite the city's global influence, social inequality remained stark. Luxury and opulence coexisted with poverty and deprivation. Philanthropy, reform movements, and public health campaigns attempted to address these disparities, but challenges persisted. The city's complexity, its mix of wealth and poverty, innovation and exploitation, opportunity and risk shaped its character. Londoners adapted, survived, and innovated in ways that kept the city resilient, even as it became the capital of a vast empire. Legacy of Imperial London. By the end of the Victorian era, London had become a city that defined and was defined by the British Empire. Its docks, markets, streets, and institutions were connected to the farthest reaches of the globe. Wealth, culture, politics, and knowledge flowed through its streets. Its identity as a global capital was firmly established. London's experience as the heart of the empire created lessons that shaped the modern city. Infrastructure must support growth. Governance must adapt to scale. Diversity enriches society, and culture and commerce drive influence. The city's global power rested not just on political authority, but on its ability to organize, innovate, and connect people and ideas across continents. London had become more than a city. It was a network, a hub, a symbol of global power and influence. Its streets and institutions reflected centuries of resilience, adaptation, and ambition from medieval survival to Tudor spectacle, Victorian industry, and imperial dominance. London's story in this era was one of contrasts and complexity, yet it demonstrated a central truth: a city capable of connecting the world, managing immense challenges, and shaping global culture could endure and thrive, becoming a force unmatched in history. London, survival and transformation in the modern era. By the dawn of the 20th century, London had become a sprawling metropolis, the heart of a global empire. Its streets were lined with the monuments of centuries past: Tudor theaters, Georgian terraces, Victorian factories, and imperial docks. Yet this era, which had seen prosperity and influence, would also confront London with unprecedented trials. Wars, economic decline, and the need for reconstruction would shape the city in ways that demanded resilience, ingenuity, and transformation. London and World War I. The outbreak of World War I in 1914 brought the first modern test of London's endurance. Though the city was not a battlefield, it became a hub of mobilization, industry, and sacrifice. Millions of Londoners joined the armed forces or worked in munitions factories. The Thames and the docks were critical for transporting troops and supplies, while railways connected the city to training camps and ports across Britain. Daily life was altered. Food rationing, air raid drills, and blackouts became part of the routine. Families coped with the anxiety of loved ones at the front. Hospitals overflowed with wounded soldiers. Public buildings were repurposed for war efforts. Londoners faced the emotional toll of mass casualty reports and the reality of total war. The city's economy shifted to support wartime needs. Factories churned out munitions, uniforms, and medical supplies. Women entered the workforce in unprecedented numbers, taking roles in offices, factories, and transport. The war accelerated social change, including the recognition of women's contributions and the need for post-war reform. The post-war period brought both relief and challenge. London celebrated the end of hostilities but the city faced economic difficulties, housing shortages, and the aftermath of loss. Soldiers returned to streets that had not slowed, while memorials and monuments began to mark the cityscape, reminding citizens of the human cost of global conflict, economic decline, and social strain. The interwar years saw London grappling with economic decline. The city's industrial base, once a driver of wealth, faced competition and modernization challenges. Unemployment rose, particularly in working-class districts. Housing shortages persisted, while slum conditions remained a stark reminder of social inequality. Yet London's spirit endured. Public projects, cultural initiatives, and educational programs sought to maintain civic pride. The arts flourished, from theaters in the West End to emerging cinemas and music halls. The city remained a center of innovation, education, and culture, even as economic pressures strained daily life. The Blitz and World War II. The greatest test of London's resilience came during World War II, on September 7, 1940. The Blitz began a relentless bombing campaign by the German Luftwaffe aimed at breaking the city's spirit. For 77 consecutive nights, London burned. Explosions shattered homes, churches, factories, and landmarks. Smoke and dust filled the air. Citizens faced danger in their own streets. Families spent nights in underground stations, transformed into shelters. Firefighters battled flames as bombs destroyed entire neighborhoods. Hospitals were overwhelmed. Yet amidst destruction, Londoners displayed remarkable courage, earning the nickname the Blitz Spirit. Cultural life adapted. Theaters staged performances in basements. Musicians played for audiences in shelters. Newspapers, radio broadcasts, and word of mouth kept morale alive. The city's infrastructure was damaged, yet the heart of London, the people, remained unbroken. The Blitz left deep scars. Thousands of civilians died. Historic buildings, including parts of St. Paul's Cathedral and the Guildhall, were damaged. Entire streets and neighborhoods were reduced to rubble. Yet even as bombs fell, Londoners continued to rebuild their lives, commute to work, and sustain essential services. Post-war rebuilding. After 1945, London faced the enormous task of reconstruction. Bombed-out neighborhoods required clearing and redevelopment. Housing shortages demanded immediate solutions, leading to the construction of temporary prefabricated homes. Later, large-scale council housing projects transformed the urban landscape. Infrastructure improvements modernized the city. Roads, bridges, and public transport systems were rebuilt and expanded. The London Underground recovered from damage, while new stations and lines were planned to accommodate growing suburban populations. Utilities, schools, and hospitals were modernized. London's reconstruction was both practical and symbolic, a declaration that the city would rise stronger than before. Immigration and social change. Post-war London became a magnet for immigrants. Citizens of the Commonwealth, particularly from the Caribbean, India, Pakistan, and Africa, moved to the city to fill labor shortages, particularly in transport, healthcare, and industry. They brought their culture, food, religion, and music, enriching London's social fabric. The Windrush generation, arriving in 1948, became an emblem of the city's transformation. This wave of immigration transformed neighborhoods. Areas like Brixton, Notting Hill, and Southall became hubs of multicultural life. Shops, markets, schools, and cultural institutions reflected a global city. Londoners learned to navigate diversity, negotiate cultural exchange, and adapt to a rapidly changing society. Economic and cultural revival. The post-war period also saw economic revival. London retained its role as a global financial center, with the City of London serving as the hub for banking, insurance, and trade. International businesses established headquarters, reinforcing the city's influence. The West End flourished as theaters reopened, cinemas thrived, and cultural festivals celebrated the city's vitality. Public works projects, such as the construction of new housing estates and the modernization of transport, demonstrated both government commitment and urban innovation. The Festival of Britain in 1951 celebrated reconstruction, science, art, and architecture, presenting London as a city reborn from wartime destruction. Challenges and transformation. Despite recovery, challenges remained. Economic inequality persisted, particularly in inner-city areas. Overcrowding, unemployment, and social tension required ongoing attention. Yet London's resilience was evident. Civic institutions, charities, and grassroots organizations supported communities. Education and healthcare expanded, fostering opportunities for the next generation. The city's identity continued to evolve. Once a center of a global empire, London now embraced multiculturalism, democratic governance, and a role as a hub of finance, culture, and education. The lessons of war, decline, and rebuilding created a city more adaptable, more diverse, and more resilient than ever before. Legacy of survival. London's experience through the 20th century was defined by survival and reinvention. Wars tested the city physically and emotionally. Economic decline and social change challenged its stability. Yet every crisis prompted innovation, reconstruction, and adaptation. The Blitz left scars that were memorialized in streets, monuments, and public memory. Post-war immigration transformed neighborhoods and culture. Infrastructure modernization prepared the city for future growth. London had proven that it could endure both destruction and social upheaval, emerging stronger, more diverse, and more connected to the global stage. By the close of the 20th century, London had reaffirmed its identity as a resilient metropolis. Its history of survival, from medieval invasions and Tudor transformations to Victorian industry and imperial power, culminated in a city capable of withstanding modern warfare, social change, and economic challenge. The streets of London carried the stories of ordinary citizens and extraordinary leaders alike. The city's buildings, theaters, docks, and neighborhoods reflected centuries of adaptation. Its identity as a global capital, a cultural hub, and a beacon of resilience had been forged through fire, bomb, and rebuilding. London's journey through war, decline, and reconstruction demonstrated the city's greatest strength: its people. Citizens, immigrants, workers, and leaders all contributed to a metropolis that could survive catastrophe and reinvent itself, ensuring that London would remain a symbol of endurance, culture, and global influence into the 21st century and beyond. Life amidst conflict and renewal. By the early 20th century, London's streets were already bustling with a population of millions. Yet, with the outbreak of the First World War, the city faced challenges unlike any before. Life changed dramatically as men enlisted for the front. Factories shifted to wartime production, and families coped with rationing and uncertainty. Daily life during war, civilians adapted to wartime London. Blackouts darkened the streets at night, and air raid drills became routine. The city's children played amidst the reminders of war, sandbags, trenches near factories, and notices warning of dangers. Hospitals were filled with injured soldiers, and volunteers, often women, supported medical efforts. Women's roles expanded significantly. With men at the front, women worked in munitions, factories, offices, and public services. This shift altered social dynamics, giving women new independence and influence in public life. While still facing societal restrictions, their contributions laid the groundwork for post-war social reforms, including suffrage. The war strained infrastructure and resources. Food rationing was implemented to ensure supply, and public transportation carried workers to factories and military installations. Londoners learned to navigate scarcity while maintaining routine schoolwork, and social life continued amidst the background of global conflict. The interwar struggle. The end of World War I in 1918 brought both relief and hardship. London faced unemployment, housing shortages, and economic instability. Soldiers returned to streets that had changed, neighborhoods struggling to rebuild, and families grappling with loss. The social divide between rich and poor remained stark, yet efforts at reform and improvement were underway. New public housing initiatives and municipal projects aimed to alleviate overcrowding. Health campaigns targeted disease and sanitation. Social programs, charities, and organizations emerged to support widows, orphans, and the unemployed. The interwar period was one of adjustment, resilience, and slow progress toward a more equitable urban life. The Blitz and World War II. The Second World War brought unprecedented destruction to London. Beginning on September 7, 1940, the Blitz lasted 77 nights of relentless bombing. Explosions devastated homes, factories, schools, and churches. Smoke and fire blotted out the sky, and residents were forced to adapt to life under threat. Families spent nights in underground stations, which became shelters. Firefighters and volunteers risked their lives combating fires and rescuing victims. The city's infrastructure, electricity, transport, and water supply was damaged but never completely halted. Londoners displayed remarkable courage, earning international recognition for their resilience. Amid the chaos, cultural life persisted. Theaters performed in basements, musicians played in shelters, and newspapers maintained communication and morale. London's spirit endured, showing that even under extreme adversity, civic life could continue, and communities could support one another. Rebuilding the city. After 1945, London faced the monumental task of rebuilding. Neighborhoods destroyed by bombing required clearing, planning, and reconstruction. Temporary housing, including prefabricated homes, addressed immediate shortages. Long-term projects focused on modern housing estates, wider roads, and improved public services. Infrastructure was modernized. The London Underground recovered and expanded. Bridges and roads were repaired, and new schools, hospitals, and public facilities were built. Reconstruction was not merely physical, it was symbolic, demonstrating the city's determination to rise stronger from devastation. Immigration and multicultural transformation. Post-war London became a destination for immigrants, particularly from Commonwealth nations. The Windrush generation, arriving in 1948, brought people from the Caribbean to fill labor shortages in transport, healthcare, and industry. Immigrants from India, Pakistan, and Africa followed, contributing to London's economy and social fabric. This wave of immigration reshaped neighborhoods. Brixton, Southall, Notting Hill, and other districts became vibrant cultural hubs. Shops, markets, schools, and community centers reflected new languages, foods, and traditions. London transformed into a multicultural city, navigating both opportunity and social tension as communities integrated and influenced one another. Social change and reform. The challenges of war and post-war reconstruction accelerated social change. Education and healthcare expanded, providing opportunities for children of working-class families. Labor unions and civic organizations advocated for better wages, working conditions, and housing. Women, having contributed extensively during wartime, retained greater social and economic influence. Cultural life adapted to a changing society. Museums, galleries, theaters, and public events embraced both traditional British culture and the influences brought by immigrant communities. Londoners negotiated new identities, blending heritage and innovation, while continuing to rebuild their city physically, socially, and culturally. Legacy of war and rebuilding. By the mid-20th century, London had emerged resilient. The city had survived 2 world wars, experienced economic hardship, and undergone massive social transformation. The lessons of this era were clear. Resilience, adaptability, and civic cooperation were central to the city's survival and growth. The Blitz left scars, but it also demonstrated the courage and determination of Londoners. Reconstruction projects modernized infrastructure, improved housing, and created new public spaces. Immigration brought cultural richness, labor force support, and a new sense of cosmopolitan identity. London had evolved from the global hub of empire into a modern, multicultural metropolis, capable of facing adversity. Its population, institutions, and neighborhoods reflected centuries of adaptation from medieval survival, Tudor reinvention, Victorian expansion, to post-war renewal. Part 2 of London's journey through war, decline, and rebuilding illustrates the city's resilience in the face of unparalleled challenges. Its streets, homes, and institutions tell stories of courage, adaptation, and transformation. London's people, whether it's sheltering during the Blitz, working in factories, or shaping neighborhoods through immigration, ensured that the city not only survived, but reinvented itself. The legacy of this era is a London that embraces diversity, modernity, and global connection. War tested its endurance, decline challenged its structures, and rebuilding redefined its identity. By the end of the 20th century, London had become a metropolis that could withstand adversity while evolving to meet the needs of its people, laying the foundation for the city we recognize today. And that brings us to the end of our journey through the incredible history of London. From prehistoric settlements to Roman Londinium, medieval streets, Tudor drama, Victorian industry, imperial power, and the resilience through war and rebuilding, we've seen how this city has constantly adapted and grown over centuries. If you enjoyed this deep dive into London's past, forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel so you won't miss more fascinating history stories. Your support helps us create more detailed and engaging videos like this one. Also, check out our other history videos. History of Mexico. Explore the rise and fall of ancient civilizations in the heart of North America. History of the Victorian era. Discover how Britain's industrial, cultural, and social transformations shaped the modern world. Biography of Socrates. Dive into the life and teachings of the philosopher who changed the course of Western thought. Ancient Mesopotamia history. Travel back to the cradle of civilization and witness the origins of writing, law, and cities. Click on these videos from the end screen to continue your historical journey. And remember, if you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button to join our growing community of history enthusiasts. Before we finish, here's a look at London today, a city that continues to evolve and inspire. Modern London is a vibrant, bustling metropolis that reflects centuries of history while embracing the future. It's one of the world's leading cities in finance, culture, technology, and tourism. Multicultural society. London is home to people from every corner of the globe, from South Asian communities in Southall to Caribbean culture in Brixton, African, Middle Eastern, and European communities. The city thrives on diversity. Festivals, markets, music, and cuisine from around the world create a unique urban culture. Economy. The City of London remains a global financial hub, with banks, insurance companies, and multinational corporations shaping international trade and commerce. Canary Wharf complements this with modern offices and innovation hubs, making London a center for business and entrepreneurship. Landmarks. London's skyline blends history and modernity. Iconic landmarks like the Tower of London, Westminster Abbey, Big Ben, and Buckingham Palace stand alongside modern marvels like the Shard, the London Eye, and cutting-edge museums. Public spaces like Trafalgar Square, Hyde Park, and the South Bank offer both leisure and cultural experiences. Technology and innovation. The city embraces technological growth, from fintech and startups to transport innovations. The underground continues to expand. Bike-sharing programs and smart city projects integrate sustainability and modern convenience into daily life. Global role. London's influence extends far beyond its borders. It is a hub for politics, finance, culture, education, and diplomacy. As a global city, London sets trends, drives innovation, and connects people across continents. Continuing its centuries-old legacy as a world center of influence, London's story is a testament to resilience, diversity, and progress. From its earliest settlements to the modern metropolis we see today, it has continually adapted and grown. I hope this journey through history inspired you as much as it did me. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel for more history adventures. Click on the end screen to explore our other videos, and let's continue uncovering the stories that shaped our world.